The CCP employs various methods to threaten and control overseas dissidents. The first method is cyber threats and surveillance. So the CCP uses advanced cyber surveillance to monitor and threaten the dissidents who are living abroad. This includes hacking emails, social media accounts, and even personal devices to intimidate or just get information on individuals who are critical of the Chinese government. So these threats often containing warnings to cease the anti-CCP activities. The group responsible for this typically is the Ministry of the State Security. They have considerable resources and authority to conduct these operations, which similar threats have led to self-censorship or just silence among dissidents, which show the potential effectiveness of these tactics. The second one is direct threat through family. So dissidents abroad often face indirect threat through the family members residing in China. The Chinese authority may detain, question, or harass family members to exert pressure on the dissident to stop the activism. These threats are generally made by the local police or security forces, which are under the direction of a higher CCP authority, which showcase the government's reach and power. There have been cases where the family member were arrested or placed under constant surveillance, which significantly impacting the dissident's actions and the mental health. And the third method is use of state media and propaganda. The CCP also uses the state-controlled media to threaten and defame dissidents, which portray them as traitors or criminals. So this is not only threatens the dissidents' reputation, but also puts them at a risk of extradition or attack. This threat content often involves like accusation of espionage or betrayal, and these campaigns are managed by the CCP's propaganda development, so the impact of these threats can be varied. They may be often led to isolation and increased scrutiny by both Chinese authority and local authorities where the dissidents resided. The fourth method is legal and extra-legal measures. So CCP has passed laws that has extraterritorial effects, such as the national security laws in Hong Kong, which is also used to target dissidents globally. So these content of this threat includes the legal repercussion, such as arrest upon return to China or extradition. So this power to enforce these laws came directly from the central government and the CCP, which highlighting their authority and serious possibility of these threats being carried out. And the fifth method is economic coercion. The CCP often uses economic threat against dissidents, which include threats to their employment and financial stability. So for some companies where they have business interests in China, may be coerced into firing or distancing themselves from some individual who critic of the Chinese government or CCP. So these threats can be implicit or explicit, and the Chinese government's economic influence gives it the substantial leverage to carry out these threats, which can often result in job loss or financial hardship for that dissident. And the sixth method is social media harassment and doxing. So on the social media platforms, dissidents are frequently targeted through the coordinated harassment campaigns. These campaigns involve threats of violence or exposure of their personal information and massive trolling operation. So typically, these are be carried out by some nationalist netizen or possibly by tactic approved or coordinated by CCP-linked bodies. So the outcome of these threats varies, but they can lead to significant psychological stress and can fear personal safety. And the seventh method is physical threats and violence. In some cases, the overseas dissidents have reported they have received threats of physical violence, which include assault and kidnapping. So these threats sometimes came from the individual who believed to be associated with Chinese intelligence or through triad groups which acting at the behest of the CCP. So such threats taken very seriously due to the past incidents where the dissidents were physically attacked or mysteriously died under the suspicious circumstances. And the eighth method is Interpol abuses. The CCP has been accused of manipulating the Interpol's red notice system to harass and detain dissidents abroad. So these threats involve allegations of crime that prompt legal actions in foreign nations. Well, the actual enforcement of this notice, which is totally depend on local law enforcement, the mere issuance of this red notice can severely restrict a dissident's ability to travel and can lead to wrongful detention. And the ninth method is psychological warfare. So for some psychological tactics, which including the sending of threatening messages or just conducting public smear campaigns, are used to instill fear and uncertainty among the dissidents. These actions are often backed by the Chinese government's broader authority to intimidate and silence opposition. This psychological impact can be profounder, which leading to reduced activism and increased compliance with CCP directives. And the tenth method is digital disinformation. To discredit and intimidate dissidents, the CCP orchestrates disinformation campaigns that distort their words and actions. So these campaigns are spread through social media and Chinese state media, which impacting the public perception of these dissidents and isolating them from the potential support networks. So the power behind these campaigns lies the CCP's Cyberspace Administration, which oversees online contents. So this effectiveness of this campaign is swaying the public opinion underscores the CCP's control over narrative and information. And the 11th method is visa denial and travel restrictions. So for dissidents and their families often face threats which related to their ability to travel, including the denial of visa applications or cancellation of their passport. These threats made by the Chinese consulate official aimed to restrict the movement of these dissidents, which effectively barred them from the international forum or returning home under the safe condition. So this implementation of these threats can be immediately and leave these dissidents in a state of uncertainty and isolation. And the 12th method is co-opting community groups. The CCP exerted influence over the Chinese diaspora community just by co-opting community leaders and organizations. So these groups then act on behalf of the CCP to relay threats and ostracize, to monitor dissidents within the community. So these threats are often viewed as community pressure by carrying out the weight of Chinese state's broader political goals. So this form of threat is pervasive and difficult to counter due to its grassroots nature and the blurred lines between the community actions and the state directives. And the 13th one is false criminal allegations. So overseas dissidents are occasionally targeted with false criminal allegations that paint them as criminals or morally corrupt individuals. So these allegations are typically publicized through Chinese state media or leaked to local authority in dissident country of residence. The threat of legal repercussions or social ostracization based on these false charges can significantly disrupt the lives of dissidents. So the potential for this threat to manifest often depends on the legal cooperation between the China and the host country, which highlighting the CCP's willingness to use this site as strategy. And the 14th method is harassing communications, threatening phone calls or messages or emails that are commonly used to direct intimidate dissidents. So these communications often include specific threats against the individuals or the family that are sometimes accompanied with detailed personal information to heighten the fear factor. These threats are likely backed by the Chinese intelligence agencies, which demonstrating both capability and intent to follow through the personal harassment. And the 15th method is threat of social excluding. So the dissidents abroad may face threats aimed at social excluding them from their own expatriate community. So these threats are communicated through social or professional networks, often insinuating that the non-compliance with CCP's view will lead to isolation or community backlash. So this group involves maybe range from local community centers to professional association, which influenced by Chinese government interests. So this effectiveness of these threats is causing social harm, showcase that the CCP's intricate influence networks abroad